Rutgers making moves in the Big Ten. Scarlet Knights at 6-2, even though they're not getting much respect from the pollsters. They are 3-2 in the Big Ten. They got a date with Ohio State coming up in Piscataway on Saturday. We got Christian Dyer here from Rutgers Wire. You can catch him right there covering the Scarlet Knights. Christian, how you doing today?
I'm good. Looking forward to this weekend. It's going to be definitely, Mark, a measuring stick game for not for Ohio State, rather, for Rutgers, for sure. But I think it might be a tougher opponent than a lot of people think for Ohio State.
Yeah, we're actually used to seeing this point spread in the 35 to 40 range, and it's 18.5. And while that still is sizable, and it would be take a massive effort for Rutgers to stay in this game and possibly pull off the upset, yes, these teams are closer than they've been. There's no question about that. When we see Rutgers taking down in Indiana by 17 points this past week, again, 3 wins in the Big Ten. Maryland was supposed to be that team that could possibly have a shot at pushing the Big Three, but that's not necessarily the case. It's been Rutgers with running the football and defense.
Yeah, it absolutely has been. And I think it's been an improved offensive line that's kind of paved the way for a lot of this. We all knew that the defense, which is nicknamed themselves the dark side, was going to be a good unit this year, probably top half of the Big Ten, if not a top 4 unit in the Big Ten. And they're certainly as good as advertised. The defensive line maybe not quite as prolific in terms of the numbers, but a lot of quarterback hits, a lot of quarterback hurries. The secondary overall has been pretty good, but it's been that offensive side of the ball. And you look between last year and this year, it's night and day for Rutgers. And now there's the caveat, right, Mark, that there's still 4 games remaining in their Big Ten schedule. And they have 2 top 10 opponents in Ohio State this weekend and Penn State. Sandwiched between them is a very good Iowa, and then a Maryland team that has been a little disappointing, but does have a good defense. So those numbers could understandably trickle down. But a year ago, Mark, Rutgers was bottom 2 in the Big Ten in almost every statistical offensive category of note. This year, they're mid-table. They're among the league leaders in rushers. They have Kyle Monangai, who I think is a sneaky pick to be the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. He's not going to get it, but I think he should be in that conversation. And it's really been the development of the offensive line. There's a first-year offensive line coach with Rutgers, Pat Flaherty, is a name that a lot of people will know around the league. I'm sure you're familiar with him. 2 decades in the NFL, 2 Super Bowl rings as an offensive line coach. So that's a pretty good resume for any Power 5 school to have.
Monangai leading the Big Ten in rushing, but he took second fiddle to Gavin Wimsatt this last game against Indiana, who ran for a school record for a quarterback, 143 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. Only had to put it up 8 times, I believe, something like that, 5 of 12 on the day for Gavin Wimsatt. So this is what the Rutgers offense is. They want to run it down your throat and only go to the air if need be. And against opponents like Indiana, that's been an effective route to victory.
Yeah, it certainly has been. And I think there's a lot of reasons why Rutgers will probably try to do the same thing. May not be able to do it this weekend against Ohio State, right? That's a front 3/front 4, depending on what base they're running out of. That's as good as any in the conference and certainly in Power 5 football. And at the end of the day, that may make it more difficult for Rutgers to be able to run the ball. We saw against Michigan, who also has a very strong front 4. There was some tough sledding for Kyle Monangai and for Gavin Wimsatt, their quarterback, to be able to find those running lanes. And most teams in college football will have difficulty against those front 4 for either a Michigan or an Ohio State. So listen, if Gavin Wimsatt's able to complete 55% of his passes against Ohio State, which would be right on mark where he's been throughout this season, Rutgers has a chance to be in this game, but it's going to come down to turnovers, time of possession, and really just being able to extend drives and make this a, not Ohio State marches down the field in 5 plays. But if they're able to bleed that clock and be able to get a couple first downs and switch field position, there's a chance Rutgers can be in this game in the 4th quarter, which I think that's what they want. They want a swinger's chance.
Yeah, and it's something that they somewhat achieved against Michigan. They had it at 17-7 midway through the 3rd quarter, late 3rd quarter, and were driving when they had, unfortunately, a 4th down call where they threw a screen pass that went for a pick 6. But up until then, were in the game, and again driving for a score that would have made it a one-score game at that point. So looking for something similar to that, limit the turnovers and possess the football. In this game, of course, at home as opposed to being on the road, could make a little bit of a difference as well. Christian Dremel was, of course,
and you may not have
yep.
someone stealing your signs on the sideline, so that could work to Rutgers' advantage too.
Have we figured out? Okay, we've not figured out anything when it comes to this, except for they are stealing signs to some degree, and we just need to put together the portions of how far up the chain this went. But in regards to the Greg Schiano comment that became so viral at halftime of the Michigan game, but then since has been walked back. Not that it was intended to be a sign stealing comment, but where is that all been vetted out as to the intent of that comment at halftime against Michigan?
Yeah, Rutgers is adamant that that was not about anything dealing with Michigan or sign stealing or anything of the nature, that it was something internal. And it wasn't about the officiating or anything else, because that was the first thought everybody had, right? It's about the officiating. And then the Connor Stallion story broke, which I'm disappointed this didn't break a few weeks before, because it would have been a wonderful Halloween outfit. I mean, Central Michigan would have been selling out of shirts if this had happened in early October. It could have been the Bartman of our generation for Halloween outfits. But at the end of the day, it was Rutgers and Greg Schiano are adamant that this has been something that it's internal. It's dealing with cleaning up things, that they have irregularities, things that they have game planned for, that they practiced, that they needed to clean up internally. People will probably disagree and say that it clearly points towards something else. But that's the line from Rutgers, and that's the line I'm going with too.
Absolutely. That's all you can go with if they're making the statement. We do know that Big Ten coaches have approached the Big Ten about discipline. Do you have any lean on or any inside information on how much Greg Schiano might be involved in that push?
Yeah, because of the nature of it being an ongoing legal investigation, Schiano's been always very shrewd, and Greg is certainly very pragmatic in how he approaches almost everything in life. And that's one of the things that I know can frustrate sometimes journalists who want those juicy quotes. He's not going to provide those. Even this week, talking about Ryan Day, and you remember the kerfuffle that they had along the sideline a year ago in Columbus when Schiano did that sprint across the field. Very good 40 time from the coach too. Good straight line speed still from Greg Schiano in his 50s. But even talking about that, he's very diplomatic. So I don't think we're going to hear too much that's going to probably leak out about where Greg Schiano is going to come down on if Michigan is guilty, and if Jim Harbaugh deserves a penalty. I'm sure internally, though, they would love to have that Michigan win vacated and put in their W column.
And if I remember correctly about that incident at Ohio Stadium, that was after a muffed punt snap,
Yes.
or a fake punt or something that went
Yeah,
wrong.
the Rutgers player didn't set the edge, so the punter, who's a young punter for Ohio State, I don't know if it's the same punter this year, is told to key. If that key is there, he's supposed to take off, and the instinct kicked in. And what are you going to do, right? You're not going to look at the scoreboard with 7-8 minutes, whatever it was left in the fourth quarter of what was growing to become a bigger Ohio State lead. And he took off for the first down, and Rutgers player took exception, and the punter was probably about 2 good yards out of bounds, right? So he was definitely out of bounds. It wasn't 50-50. And Rutgers' Aaron Cruikshank kind of lowered the shoulder, delivered the hit. A little bit of a melee ensued, and then Schiano went racing across the sidelines, trying to separate, protect his player. Words were exchanged with Day, who I think thought that Schiano was taking offense at the play, not at the lack of protection for the player. Both have been very diplomatic about it. And keep in mind that Greg Schiano was on Ryan Day's staff. So they do know each other for better or for worse well, and there seems to be a mutual respect there.
Yeah, it's coming back to me now. Now back to Rutgers' mission in this game. Gavin Wimsatt, of course, is developing as a quarterback. He has a dual threat nature in terms of his passing effectiveness. Is that being developed? Is he progressing in that area?
He has, and he's probably about an 8 to 9 percentage point increase in his completion percentage. And again, I always caution that number could trickle down a little bit as you face the likes of the Ohio States, Penn States, and Iowa and Maryland's defenses over the next couple of weeks. All very good defenses. But Gavin Wimsatt has gotten more comfortable. He came in as a former four-star recruit, top 15 quarterback in the nation, had a lot of big-time offers. He was a big get, and he kind of bought into Greg Schiano and the whole rebuilding process early on and became a Pied Piper for his class, to the point where in 2021, he was a senior in high school at Owensboro, Kentucky. And I don't believe Rutgers has ever gotten a player from Kentucky. So it was a big get for them to pull someone, he really believed in the direction of the program. He graduated early after 2 games or 3 games in high school and enrolled in September at Rutgers. So his redshirt year was basically his senior year of high school. So he is a young player, just turned 20 this week. He looks more comfortable in the pocket. There's a new offensive coordinator who's another name you're going to be familiar with, Kirk Shiraka, who's been at Penn State in West Virginia. He was a former head coach at Delaware for a few years. He was most recently at Minnesota as their offensive coordinator, and really did a good job of taking kind of a middle of the pack Minnesota team and leading them to being a top 4 total offense last year. And a lot of it was based on the ground game, which is no surprise. That's been Rutgers' strength this year. But Wimsatt's been making smarter reads, more accurate reads. He's not turning the ball over. He's not throwing into double coverage, triple coverage like he was a year ago. He's comfortable in the pocket, and that's being seen in the fact that he has more rushing yards this year than he did in his previous 2 years combined. And he kind of reached that number by the 4th or 5th game last year. And Rutgers doesn't want him taking off a lot, but if it's there, he's got the opportunity. The wide receivers don't have separation. He's allowed to take off, and it's been very effective for Rutgers, and I think a pleasant surprise. But I think the difference of having Shiraka, having an adult in the room, and I know that's going to sound like a little bit of a dig at the previous offensive coordinator, and Mark, it is. I think they tried to overcomplicate things the past couple of years, get a little too cute on offense. This year, it's been simple. It's been bread and butter. We're going to run the ball, play action. We're going to try to get and use Wimsatt's feet, get him out in the open. He throws very well on the run. The short to intermediate stuff, some of that touch is lacking, but he's doing a better job of throwing his receivers open. Still needs to get some of those deep connections, but there's big improvement. And considering that he's got 2 years left after this year, if Rutgers can maintain the offensive line for him, there's a good chance that his development will only continue.
Got Christian Dyer here from Rutgers Wire on the USA Today platform, breaking down the Scarlet Knights for us, taking on the Buckeyes at noon Eastern time at Rutgers. So on one hand, we know what Rutgers is. You've outlined it. We can see it in the box scores and the stats. I've seen them play a few times this year, and it's been what they've been under Greg Schiano, and it fits their personnel, certainly. Ground and pound and play action. Now against Ohio State and looking for a path to victory, a path to an upset. On one hand, you would think, well, we want to take the air out of the football and do exactly what we do best and hope that we can be competent in the run game enough to keep their offense on the field. And the Buckeyes, for as good as they are not nearly as explosive as they typically are on offense. Or is the avenue to maybe pull some rabbits out of a hat, do some different exotic type plays to try to loosen up the defense and pull their pants down from time to time here to make some big plays. Your thoughts on a Rutgers path to victory?
Well, I think it's probably going to be, you gave me option A and B. It's probably going to be C, which is a combination of both. I like to throw D out there, which is a couple fire drills at the Ohio State Hotel around 2:00 in the morning. Might make for a groggy team. Remember, this is a noon kickoff on CBS. But I think at the end of the day, Rutgers knows their identity. They'll probably try 1 or 2 shots down the field just to loosen things up early. There might be an exotic play, a flea flicker, something like that they're just trying to do to get some of their players into space. Rutgers at the wide receiver position has been a little thin this year, probably not as savvy as they were a year ago. So I'm not sure that there's a whole lot they can do in terms of that. But there is going to be, they're going to try to get Um, Ohio State not to stack the box, certainly, and put 8 or 9 bodies in there and be able to respect Gavin Wimsatt and his arm and his ability to make plays. I think time of possession is going to be key. If it's over 50-50 in the direction of Rutgers, then I think they have a shot. Of course, that could also mean that Ohio State has marched down the field quickly on them, and they're not holding the possession either quite as much. But I think there's a chance for Rutgers to be competitive here in the third and the fourth quarter, which is going to be the measuring stick. Not a lot of teams have done that this year against Ohio State, and Rutgers didn't do a great job of that 2 years ago. They kept things close maybe for a quarter and a half. Now, let's see if you can add another quarter midway through the third quarter. That's got to be the selling point for Greg Schiano. It's going to be a full house of recruits as well.
And then the other selling point for Greg Schiano is just that he knows how to run a football program. So we saw what the disaster was when he arrived. They had lost at one point 21 consecutive Big Ten games, most of those by 40, 45 points. He walks in and he has his detractors, but I don't think anyone would argue that the guy knows what he's doing. So he immediately made them better, brought in a lot of transfers, but still basically took the same personnel and just made it competent in the Big Ten. And now we're seeing other levels of that as they're starting to win games on their level in the Big Ten, where they were being blown out by those teams. Then they were being competitive against those teams. And now they're winning against Northwestern and Indiana and other schools like that. So where is the ceiling for this program? How much more can he elevate based on their resources, which, hey, in this conference are pretty substantial, especially starting in 2024. And then we know that New Jersey plays some good high school football, and he's close to the DMV.
Yeah, and the Florida pipeline has been fruitful as well. Once again, they seem to get away from that early on up in Greg Schiano 2.0. Listen, I mean, this is beginning to feel like 2005, which was Rutgers' return to their first bowl game in 25, 30 years. They played in the Insight Bowl against Arizona State, in Phoenix. So that's basically an away game, but they performed well. I think they lost 45-42 or something like that. And you kind of got that sense. And the next year was the 2006 season when they beat Louisville, and they had that pandemonium and Piscataway moment on Thursday night and finished 11-2, finished ranked for the first time in program history. It's beginning to feel like that's building a little bit. I don't know if we're ever going to reach that level here at Rutgers where you have a program that's going to be consistently ranked, especially in the teens like Rutgers was that season. But I think that this could very easily be a program that year in, year out gets 7 or 8 wins. Maybe knocks off every once in a while when they, in a particularly strong season mark, they knock off one of a Penn State, Michigan, or Ohio State and have an upset. I don't know if it's going to be a team that's consistently going to be able to compete with those top 3. But at the end of the day, they've shown that they can beat their peer schools. And those were the programs that were, like in Indiana, like in Illinois, Northwestern, those programs. And now the next step's going to be, can they beat in Iowa next weekend? It's going to be difficult on the road, but Iowa might be there for the taking. Iowa hasn't been fantastic this season. Can they beat Maryland in the season finale and get their 7th win or potentially 8th win, depending on how the Iowa game goes? Those are going to be getting your peer schools. And if Rutgers can consistently do that and split kind of those schools that are the Michigan States, Northwesterns, Illinois, Indiana, Maryland, Iowas, and take care of things in their conference schedule like they have the past 3 years, they're 9-0 and out of conference, and they played a fair number of Power 5 schools. I think they've got a shot to be a 6-7 win team consistently. And, every once in a while you have that magical run. You have 8 wins, you have 9 wins. But I think they have to look at the model, quite frankly, of the Wisconsins and the Iowas. They don't get the big level talents. And I know their division is easier than being in the East, but they're able to consistently get to the 8-win plateau, the 9-win plateau. That may not be always achievable for Rutgers, but I think 7 or 8 wins, and then you take care of business in the bowl game, you're being talked about as being number 24, number 25 in the country if you do that in the Big Ten East. And I think that's a very, very sweet spot for Rutgers.
And though the conference is going to become markedly more difficult starting next season with 4 significant programs, and everybody's schedule is going to be more difficult, at the same time, to your point about the East-West disparity, that's going to be washed away, and everybody's going to play a pretty balanced schedule. So at least that's going to swing back into Rutgers' favor, not having to face Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and sometimes if Michigan State's up, as opposed to what the Western Division teams face in mediocrity. All right, Christian Dyer breaking down Rutgers for us. The Scarlet Knights and the Buckeyes get together on a Saturday in what could be a little bit more interesting of a matchup than it's been in a long time. I know the 9-year history in the Big Ten, it's been pretty brutal for Rutgers taking on Ohio State. The aggregate scores pretty much in that 50-10 range. So this one should be quite a bit closer than that.
Yeah, I would think so. I still think, my pick has been, and I'm going to ruin it, it's coming out tomorrow, but it was going to be 41-13 Ohio State, which I think shows some progress, shows some development, but it's really something you can sell to recruits that, okay, we are closing the gap. I think Ohio State is markedly better. And I think the fact that Rutgers is bowl eligible has gotten maybe a little bit more buzz than people expected and got people excited about an upset possibility. But, they played well against Michigan. I think Ohio State is maybe just that much better than Michigan right now. So if it's 41-13, 41-20, whatever it ends up being, it'll be a sign of progress.
Christian, thank you so much for stopping by, breaking things down for us.
Appreciate you, Mark. Take care.